So let's take a look at Studying Animal Behavior Part 2. Here we're going to focus on how do we go about studying animal behavior? What kind of questions do we ask? So let me move over to our PowerPoint. I think we're here. So we're asking, how do we go about studying animal behavior? Well, just a clarification here. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, researchers who studied animal behavior were actually called ethologists most of the time. And ethology is this field of study in which you study all aspects of behavior using biology or using biological methods. And what are these aspects to the study of behavior? I've come up with 5, and these are the typical 5. So how do we go about studying behavior? Well, first, we could simply observe behavior and describe it. We want to create a catalog of behaviors, an extensive list of all of the things that an animal does after observing that animal. This is called an ethogram, a catalog of behaviors. And many researchers, this is the first step, especially in an animal that hasn't been well studied. So if we go back to the 1960s, chimpanzees were not well understood. We really didn't know much about their behavior. Well, maybe some indigenous peoples did, but Western Europeans and Americans did not know much about chimpanzees. And along comes Jane Goodall, who ends up studying wild chimpanzees in the 1960s in Tanzania. She was a phenomenal observer of behavior. She took very careful observations, and we learned so much about the social behavior of chimpanzees, things like grooming and fighting and making up, and the hierarchy in the groups that chimpanzees form. We learned about their feeding behaviors. Well, what are they eating? Oh, they're hunting. They're working together to hunt. They're eating other foods, and they're using tools to get their foods. That's interesting too. Describing and observing and describing behavior is really an important aspect of studying behavior. It's literally the first thing you need to do. And then you might ask other questions. Some people are really interested in the causes of behavior. What causes this behavior? What's happening to trigger this behavior? And these are often mechanisms like, the nervous system is involved, or how is the endocrine or hormonal system involved? This often involves the study of physiology. So Helen Fisher, for example, is really interested in humans and asking the question, what are the mechanisms or the causes of romantic love or romantic passion, if you will, right? And she wanted to understand really the chemistry behind romantic passion. So she hypothesized that romantic passion or attraction is caused by elevated levels of certain brain chemicals like dopamine or norepinephrine. She was focusing in on the mechanisms that cause this behavior. And she tested her hypothesis. What she did first was she found a bunch of subjects who were probably college students and were in love. And she gave them a survey to determine kind of how in love are they, what is their strength, what is the strength of their passion, if you will. Then she presented these subjects with several different kinds of pictures. One of them would be of the person they loved. One of them would be a neutral picture. Sometimes one was a picture of a person they didn't like so much anymore, like an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend or something. And then she watched the brain, essentially, using a functional MRI. She watched the flow of blood in the brain as individuals were looking at different pictures. What she was looking for was really trying to kind of figure out what areas of the brain are are active when you're looking at a picture of someone you love, especially if you have a real strong passion, right? And this is what she found. Some areas of the brain, like the caudate nucleus and the ventral tegmental area, don't worry about where those are more active when a subject viewed someone they loved than some other neutral picture. And these areas of the brain are really important in the brain's reward system. These are areas in which cells make a ton of the neurotransmitter dopamine. And so it seems that as you study a picture of someone you love, then areas of the brain that are active are making dopamine. Dopamine may be really important. She also found that subjects that had the most passionate love also had the most brain activity. So there's this nice positive correlation there. She's looking at the causes of this behavior, the causes of romance or romantic passion. What's happening in the brain? Okay, so you could study causation of behavior. You might also study ontogeny, or the development of behavior. So how does this behavior actually develop? Does it have a genetic basis, or is it learned? Do past experiences have an important role to play in the behavior? Ontogeny, or development. How did this behavior come about, right? How did it develop? Here's a good example. How does courtship song and behavior develop in male cowbirds? And there's a picture of our male cowbird over there. It turns out that cowbirds are really interesting animals. The female cowbird will lay her eggs in the nest of other species, unrelated species. She waits around until, a cardinal or a chickadee leaves its nest, and then she swoops in, lays her eggs, and she's out of there. So a young cowbird is raised by other species. A young cowbird never sees its own species when it's being raised. They are what we call our nest parasites. And usually males' song, because the songbirds have particular courtship songs that they sing, usually that develops during when they're nestlings, when they hear their dads singing songs, when they hear the other members of their species singing to them, or singing songs. That's when young birds usually learn their song. So the question is, how on earth do cowbirds learn their song? And if they never see another cowbird, how do they know their song? How does it develop? And a researcher named Meredith West and her colleagues focused on this. I worked with Meredith West. She was one of my graduate advisors, so I really like her research. And she found that a couple of things were kind of interesting. First of all, it seems that male cowbirds have it kind of develop without any practice, without any exposure to other males. They develop a kind of stereotypical cowbird male courtship song that they can sing and is attractive to females. Females will find them and mate with them if they sing this stereotypical song. But what's really interesting is, as they gain experience, so they kind of cluster together, the adults during the breeding season, and as they gain experience in that group, they listen to and hear other male songs, they change their song. Their song gets better or more attractive as they get older and more experienced. Females are more interested in the modified version of the song than in the more stereotypical, less complex version of the song that all males can do without any experience. So it looks like this behavior develops in really kind of an interesting way. Experience definitely plays a role, and yet the behavior appears without practice in kind of a simplified version. So it's a kind of interesting thing. Another interesting thing is that courtship behavior, males also have some courtship behavior that females find attractive without any experience. But as males experience more courtship, when they do court females, they get better at their courtship behaviors. They learn from their experience with females, and they get more advanced courtship behaviors in their repertoire, and those are more attractive to females. So this is just an example of how we could study the ontogeny of behavior, or think about how does this behavior develop over time. Here's the fourth one, function or survival value. Why are the animals doing that? Does this somehow help the animal survive or maybe reproduce at higher rates? What's the adaptive value of this behavior? And my example comes from research done by Konrad Lorenz. Konrad Lorenz was kind of one of the founding fathers of ethology, if you will. And one of the things that Konrad Lorenz writes a lot about is, in fact, imprinting behavior. In geese and in ducks, you'll see this kind of interesting thing where mom typically mom is typically near the nest when the eggs hatch. Once the eggs hatch, the chicks will kind of imprint on mom and begin following her around wherever they go. They become attached to her during a kind of critical period early in their lives. And after that critical period is over and they've made the attachment, they won't change their attachment. They're going to follow mom no matter what. All right? This seems very valuable, right? Imprinting seems to have survival value. It's clear that goslings that imprint on mom are going to survive at higher rates than goslings that don't imprint, or goslings that imprint on something else. So it seems like this is a very adaptive behavior for goslings. What's really interesting is if mom is not around, they will imprint on the nearest warm being, if you will. They will imprint on a human, like Konrad Lorenz has them following him around in that picture. They will imprint on a stuffed animal if you give them a stuffed animal and there's nothing else to imprint on. And then once they're imprinted, that's it. That's who they're imprinted on. So this process of imprinting is really interesting. We can think about the development of it, but when we think about the function of their survival, it's pretty adaptive. It's easy to see the adaptive value of a behavior like imprinting, because you typically are going to imprint on mom. She's the one around. Follow mom, stick with mom. You're going to have a higher chance of survival. At least you would think so. Here's one more. The evolution of behavior. How did this behavior evolve? How did it come to be the way it is today? How did this behavior change over time? This is a much harder type of question to study, in part because sometimes it's difficult to study the evolution of anything. It's long. It may take hundreds or thousands or millions of years to evolve, so it's much more difficult to study. Mother Nature, our textbook, takes on and focuses on lactation in mammals, and asks the question just briefly, hey, how did this behavior evolve? And also asks the question about function of behavior, or the function of behavior as well. This is a material that you should read. It's just rather interesting. But the basic idea, I think, is that lactation clearly has survival value. It's for sure. It beats out the alternatives. It did beat out the alternatives. So when we think about when mammals really started increasing in number, it happened at about the same time that dinosaurs disappeared, or dinosaurs went extinct. Well, what are some of the differences? One main difference could have been lactation. Mammals are lactating and reptiles are not. Clearly, mammals did better than these reptiles, than these dinosaurs. There are still lots of reptiles around, but clearly mammals really increase at that time. So the function of lactation is probably easier to understand. How to figure it out? It's harder to figure out how it evolved. Mother Nature, Sarah Hardy, suggests that it probably began with some egg-laying, brooding reptile, because there are egg-laying, brooding reptiles, that started to secrete some milk-like thing from their bodies that enabled its young to thrive. That maybe led to the development of glands for the production of milk. And the production of milk enables young to thrive. It enables young to grow very, very quickly. It gives young a huge amount of fats and antibodies and hormones and a whole variety of things that they may need. Plus, it allows mom to go out and forage for a while, leaving the young behind, leaving them at the nest, and she comes back, and then she can support them with lactation again. The function of that behavior is easy to understand. The evolution of the behavior much harder to understand, and so that's when it gets to be this is a fun question, thinking about the evolution of behavior. Okay. Sometimes we take these questions that I just drew up and think about them as being a proximate or an ultimate question. Proximate questions encompass or include the how questions. What are the mechanisms that cause this behavior? What are the physiological mechanisms that cause this behavior? How did this behavior develop? That's a how question. What is the ontogeny of this behavior? How did it develop? The ultimate questions are more why questions. Hey, why did this behavior come to be the way it is today? What's the adaptive value or function of this behavior? And how did this behavior evolve? How did it come to be the way it is today? Those are bigger why questions, or what we would call ultimate questions. So sometimes we think about studying behavior, we say, oh, is that a proximate question you're interested in, or is that an ultimate question you're interested in? And we'll talk about the techniques we use to study behavior in our next video. So I am going to escape out of here, and if I can finish this.